Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Superintendent Update, our chance to talk with Superintendent Eric Conti about all the stuff going on in the school district. Eric, thanks for joining me.
Rich, my pleasure.
And with everything going on, we could probably talk for an hour, but I won't do that to you or the good people at home watching. But I think we would start off with probably the big news of the month, and that's, the state has, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has sort of said that elementary schools have to be full in person, all day, and then later, starting April 5th?
April 5th.
And then later in the month for middle schools.
April 28th.
Yeah, so just, what does that mean for the district and how are you kind of looking at it?
It means major adjustments for the district, and so that's what we're doing. Before we get started, though, I want to make sure I thank Robert Paris for producing this evening.
Absolutely, always does a great job.
Segment. So Robert, thank you. It means we have to make some adjustments to schedules, and a critical piece of information for that from us, because the state, the Board of Ed, is allowing remote instruction to continue for the families that want to keep their children fully remote. We had to find out which families wanted their children to return. So essentially what the state's doing is eliminating the hybrid option, which is the option that we were in. So elementary students on April 5th will either need to be fully in person or fully remote. So those will be the two choices that families have. The number of students that return to in-person impact lots of different things in the school, so that's what we're looking at. If very few students make the transition, then the adjustments will be easier. If a whole lot of students come back, then we're going to have to move some of the remote teachers back with them. And we have to coordinate other things like lunch and try to maintain some of the COVID precautions that we've had in place all year.
Right.
Social distancing is one of those ones that is particularly important and contentious at the same time. So the state is saying they really want to see us over 3 feet. People around the state, and our objective from the summer was really keeping everyone at 6 feet of distance. And so I think there's always some push and pull there. CDC is considering making changes to their recommendation, but right now there's a difference between what the state is supporting and what the CDC is supporting. So there's a lot of information that we're processing. I think elementary principals have done a fantastic job creating schedules. They've gotten new schedules out to their staff. I think they're looking at how, again, to manage lunch in a distributed way. What that means is instead of sending a group of 100, 150 kids to the cafeteria, 200 kids, we're having students eat in their classrooms, so we have to make sure that we're supervising 25 or 30 classrooms, which requires 25 or 30 adults. So again, there's logistical stuff that we have to figure out, but again, we have very talented teachers, very talented principals, and they're working at it. And I don't want to forget the great instruction that's happening remotely as well. So I think a lot of families are very pleased with the remote instruction, the full remote instruction their kids are getting, and want those relationships with the teachers to continue. So again, I think we'll have two great options to offer elementary families on April 5th, and we're just working hard to make sure we get there.
And now I think you mentioned this, when discussing it with the school committee, but is there a possibility that some students might have a different teacher or different classmates, even, maybe in person or online?
It's possible. Again, if enough students want to return to in person, and I have to move some teachers who are fully remote at this time back into classrooms, then obviously the rest of their classes who are remote would need to get redistributed, and we're not going to have a class of 5 and then a class of 20 where we would redistribute some of the kids. It's like a restart to the school year, is essentially depending, again, on how many students choose either full remote or full return. If we have a handful of students want to make the change, then we might be able to absorb the handful of students into a full return without disrupting um, either the full remote or the full return that much. So again, the survey closes tomorrow. I just want to make sure families know that if they haven't filled it out, that they need to make sure they fill it out by Friday. That's March 19th, and we'll see what happens. So next week we should have a clearer picture. I think probably have a clearer picture by the school committee meeting on Tuesday night.
Okay, well, keep an eye on that then. I know one of the things that the state also changed is transportation regulations. They now say that the buses can be fully full, but I know that that's a whole other issue as far as trying to reconfigure bus routes, and just talk about the difficulty of that and what the plans are.
Well, again, Rich, it's a restart to the school year. So can we have more students on buses? And the answer is yes. Is that a good thing? In most situations it is, and I think we'll look to expand our bus capacity. We just, for the elementary levels in particular, I think we wanted to have the schools open, get the students into a new routine, and not add anything to the bus capacity at this time, but probably towards the end of the month, look towards increasing the capacity. The challenge, again, even though the state has lifted the capacity restrictions, keeping track of where the students are seated on a full bus as opposed to a bus that's running at 30 or 40% capacity is more challenging. And if we can't keep track exactly of where the kids are seated, then if there's a positive case, we run the risk of having to quarantine the entire bus.
Right.
So, and I think that's the bigger challenge here in general is we don't want our fully open plan to result in more classroom closures,
Right.
because then it sort of defeats the purpose to have the students back in full time if they have to be quarantined for 2 weeks, either because of a crowded bus or a crowded classroom. So I think that's always the challenge.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of things to figure out. And then I guess one of the questions that comes to mind is, do you think that this is the right move by the state? It seems like we're almost at the end of the school year. We've got a couple months left. Do you think it would have been better if they just waited for the fall to have full in-person 5 days a week? Or are you in agreement with this? The more time with teachers, the better.
I think it depends on the seat you're in. So I'll say it in my seat in Burlington, I think that our kids are learning at the elementary level, especially in 5 days a week. I think we could have maybe made some adjustments, but I would have been, from a learning perspective, satisfied with what we're seeing moving forward. I think having the remote afternoon lesson always prepared us to close just in case we needed to. With the new strains of the virus, again, we were well prepared to either have learning take place in person or remotely. So I think that's what I'd say. But from the state's perspective, they still have what I think the last I've seen is 300,000 students who haven't been back in school at all. I think they are concerned about getting those students back. I think they didn't want the fall to be the first time kids had been doing that after a year and a half. So I think they're recognizing this is going to be disruptive, but they want the disruption to happen now, so that we can be more ready to open in the fall. So again, I think my decision would change based on the seat I was in. If I was in the commissioner's seat, I'd certainly I'd be thinking about this differently. Again, I think in Burlington, we've had our elementary students back, the ones whose families have wanted them back in school, 5 days a week since September 10th. So
right.
Again, it's just a different situation. But I recognize that parents want their students back full days. I think some of the kids are very excited to be at recess with their friends, and
Sure.
I think it's an indicator of a return to more normalcy. I just think we have to have lots of conversations at once. So again, from my perspective, not having nearly the complexity of someone at the state level, it just would have seemed to me that a concurrent conversation about getting all of our staff vaccinated at the same time would have made the transition easier. We're probably going to get there. I think we've made great progress, and I think there's been more vaccines available. But asking our educators and staff to sort of scramble for their vaccines has added a layer of complexity to the puzzle. That's all.
Yeah. And now, we talked about the deadlines for starting up full in person for the elementary and middle school. Any sense of when high school might, across the state might be sort of ordered back full time?
Again, the high school technically, from the state languages, the high school, they haven't given us an official date, but we need to be ready to open full in 2 weeks, in any 2-week period of time.
Right.
The reality of that is they really did give us a deadline. So I mean, they gave us one without saying what it is we need to start that planning now. So we need to be prepared to be fully open, around when the middle school, the deadline is for the middle school. So sort of at the end of April. It's not like they could come in next week and say, okay, without any planning, you have 2 weeks to open fully. That's just kind of,
Right.
I think any of us who do this work for a living realize they were basically giving us a deadline without giving us a deadline. So
Be prepared. And I know early on, way back last summer, the discussion around when you were coming up with the different models for, hybrid was that, there was a lot, the high school had a sort of unique space restraints. Like what's sort of what can be, done that you didn't think could be done, I guess, last summer?
Again, I think that our entire plan for both the middle and high school was driven by the amount of space that we could have between students.
Right.
And that's why we established the cohorts to begin with, cohort A and cohort B, because we couldn't have all the kids together and provide the space that we needed. So I think clearly the state is reducing the recommendation of the social distancing, and we feel that we can bring all the students back at the middle and high school level, at over 3 feet, but we're going to be very clear to parents and staff that we can't be at 6 feet. So,
Right.
So I'm saying I think that's where it is, and then there's some science out there that says there's really no difference between 3 and 6 feet with masks in terms of COVID mitigation, but again, I think people need to accept that and they need to be comfortable with that. And then we still have to feed students, and that's a maskless activity.
Right.
And so everyone is still recommending 6 feet for those type of activities. So again, our cafeterias are only so large. Our cafeteria tables don't really contribute to 6 feet of distancing. So again, it's another logistical problem that the principal and his team are really working to solve. And again, they've been very creative so far, so I'm sure they'll come up with creative solutions.
Eat outside.
Yeah, that's absolutely part of it. And as the weather gets better, our airflow gets better, windows can be opened. I think there's a lot of benefits to the warmer weather.
Yes, absolutely. And last thing, I just want to switch gears a little bit. I know that the school committee and administration has been for the last several years trying to get funding for the high school from the Massachusetts School Building Authority.
Mm-hmm.
This year, switch tack, you're looking at Fox Hill. Just talk about the presentation that was presented to the school committee and that decision to go in that direction this year.
Well, what's the saying that if you do the same thing over and over again and expect different results, that's the definition of insanity, right?
Right.
So we had, you can only prioritize one project at a time to the state. So we had been, after the facilities analysis that we had done, it was recommended that the high school be our first priority. I think after a 7th or 8th submission that wasn't moved forward in the process, we wanted to switch tactics. So we did have an elementary need. Fox Hill was that need. There are modulars in use there. There is some enrollment pressure, and we felt those factors, along with the building having been built in 1960, made a compelling case. So that's really why we shifted it. Doesn't eliminate the needs for investment in this building, but we're hoping that we can continue with both, and if the state continues to move Fox Hill through the process, then we can get some state funding to build another Fox Hill Elementary School, and again, then the high school would become our first priority again if that project were to be adopted and move through the process.
Excellent. All right. Well, more questions that, well, like I said, we could talk probably for an hour, but I think we hit all the big topics. So appreciate your time coming in once again, and I will talk to you again next month.
Rich, always a pleasure, and again, Robert Paris has done an excellent job producing
Absolutely.
this segment, so I just want to make sure he gets his due, and again, I'm looking forward to some of the changes that are going to be happening here pretty quickly, and again, I just can't thank our teacher, staff, administration enough. They've been very flexible this entire year, and reopening to full days is another example of their willingness to make that happen. So, and their talents. So,
Yeah. Well, we hope it all goes smoothly.
me too.
Well, thank you again.
All right, take care.